Got Doug.
Okay, I assume that is my cue to start sharing, and let me do that. I want to discuss a certain biblical term today. Maybe you have heard of it, maybe you have not. It is the biblical term putting away, and oftentimes it gets mistranslated as divorce. So I think it's an important topic for us to go through, but I want you to remember that last song, that God is indeed a good, good Father. So this is actually going to be a good message. I think it would be one that will encourage you and maybe erase some doubts and fears that you might have, and uh, kind of take away some of the criticisms that maybe we have leveled at one another and ourselves. So, um, marriage, divorce, and remarriage is often a very contentious topic. Beliefs in Christianity even often vary quite a bit, sometimes dramatically, between denominations, pastors, and individuals. And I want to discuss this today. I'm not trying to set any policy for any denomination or congregation. I know that there are a variety of people here from different backgrounds, but I want to give you some material for your consideration. And frankly, this is also how I view this particular topic. This will be somewhat in the form of a book report. I'm going to be using a book that was written by Dr. Eitan Bar. He's a Jewish Christian scholar with advanced degrees in Bible, apologetics, and theology. He is a native Hebrew speaker, and I think that's very important because that he understands the Jewish cultural background and language certainly much better than anybody who doesn't come from that background. He combines his Jewish background with his Christian education and faith to offer this perspective. And he's had some experiences as well in various Christian denominations. So his background is quite varied and quite broad. This is the third book he's written that I've read. He's got a bunch more, but anyway, this is what the cover looks like, what the Bible actually teaches about divorce and remarriage. So I'm going to be quoting quite extensively from this particular book. Um, However, there's way more background than I could ever hope to give in this brief message. So if this is of interest to you, I suggest acquiring a copy. You can just get it on Amazon and studying it to gain a broader background in order to help deal with the trauma of divorce, especially with respect to any uncertainties or fears about how God views divorced people. And I want to reassure you, and as we say many times in this ministry, God is not mad at you. Whether you are divorced or not, or going to get divorced, God is not mad at you. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Let's begin in the Garden of Eden. That's important to understand some background because a lot of things went wrong with humanity in the first couple of chapters of Genesis. In Genesis 1, verse 26, and God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and so on. Now, when you're in Sunday school and you think of God making man in his image, we tend to think of, oh, he's got a head and he's got a body and he's got arms and he's got legs. Well, okay, fine, but I think it's much deeper than that. It's relational, as I have in that next bullet point. In his own image is relational. It's very important to realize that God is relational, as it says, let us make man in our image. That's a strong hint of the Trinity, right in the beginning of Genesis, a strong hint. Anyway, verse 27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. In his own image, relational, the Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit, equality, not hierarchy. There was a famous creed that was written roughly 300 AD when there was a real controversy going on in the church. And one of the really, really intelligent men dealing with this issue was a man by the name of Athanasius. He's an important character to remember, and if you can ever find any of his writings, it would be good to read. A little complicated sometimes, but they're excellent. So this website, or this website that I found, and you see that in blue at the bottom of the screen, You can copy that and you can click on it and you'll be able to find the entire Athanasian Creed. I've just picked out line 26, 27, and 28 because Athanasius, and this is the early Christian church before we got divided into East and West, and before the West fractured into Catholic and Protestant. This is what the Christian church believed, understood, and taught. The whole three persons are co-eternal and co-equal. The Father, Son, and Spirit are all eternal and they are all equal. There is no hierarchy. Verse 27 or number 27. So that in all things, as aforesaid, unity, the unity in Trinity and the Trinity in unity is to be worshiped. Unity in the Godhead is extremely important, and that's an image that we were created in, unity. In fact, I dare say, and I can say for myself, my greatest uh, pain and suffering is when relationships are broken down with either family or good friends. That's the source of my greatest pain. But the source of my greatest joys are when relationships are going well with my wife, with my parents, with my siblings, with my friends, with my kids, with my grandkids. There's nothing better than when a good friendship and a good relationship is going really well. And that's that unity that is being hinted at. And the Trinity enjoys that all the time and always has. And we were made in that image. We were meant to have that joy in unity. So he, therefore, that will be saved must think of the Trinity. And one of my favorite theologians, Dr. Kruger, Baxter Kruger, often says this: you got to start with the Trinity. You got to think in terms of Trinity. You just don't think of the Father by himself. You don't think of Jesus by himself. You don't think of the Holy Spirit by himself. You think of all three always being together. Always being together. Yes, they're distinct. The Father is never the Son is never the Father, the Spirit is never any one of the other two. He's always the Spirit, but they are in an incredibly close relationship that you can only describe them as one. I know I'm spending a lot of time on it, but on this topic, but we have to understand that from the beginning, Adam and Eve were equal. Yes, one was distinctly male, the other was distinctly female, but they were equal. It was not a hierarchy. Got to understand that because that's what went sour. Now, this equality was damaged in the fall, and I'll just read part of what God said after Adam and Eve had taken of the fruit. To the woman, he said, I will greatly increase your pains in childbearing. With pain, you will give birth to your children. And I will also add to that, some women die in childbirth. My mother did. My mother died giving birth to me. So that's a pretty high risk as something that entered into it in the fall. That's a big deal. Frankly, I don't see how women can, after having one baby, I don't see how they can ever uh, have the courage to have a second one or a third one. Just I hats off to you, ladies. You got strength I don't have. Anyway, your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. This is not the desired way between men and women that God had intended. This is a statement of how things are in the fall. For whatever reason, she doesn't look to God anymore, but she looks to her husband. And oftentimes, not always, but plenty of times, we have husbands ruling in a very cruel and harsh and abusive way over their wives. Yeah, it does happen the other way around too, where women are very harsh and cruel to their husbands. But most of the physical violence in a marriage is a man attempting to exert his authority over a woman. Never was that way from the beginning, never intended to be. Now, to Adam, he said, to the man, because you listened to your wife, you should have listened to God. He told them what they could do, and ate of the tree which I commanded, about which I commanded you, you must not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Now, he never said that Adam was cursed or that Eve was cursed. He says the ground is cursed. Why is it cursed? God didn't curse it, but Adam, the way Adam deals with it, he's cursed. The ground itself is cursed by Adam's behavior. And when you look at our modern world, um, we have done a lot of damage to this planet Practically every time that we have dug a mine somewhere, we have polluted the ground. We have polluted our food supply. We have polluted our water supply. We polluted the very air we breathe. We have brought some climate change upon us. And we've done a lot of things that are really nasty. Now they're talking about all the microplastics in the ocean. That wasn't something God created. That's something we did. We are, in a sense, we cursed the ground. And it kind of feels like sometimes the planet is wanting to get rid of us. Anyway, just I feel that way sometimes. Anyway, through painful toil, you will eat of it all the days of your life. And I grew up in a farm ranch country out in western South Dakota, and it's hard work. It is really hard work out there. And I understand that maybe in ways that other folks don't. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. So anyway, that was the result of Adam turning away from the face of God and Eve turning away from the face of God. That is what's happened. We lost that equality, and we have really messed it up. So we see it here anyway that equality was seriously damaged. And throughout history, many cultures have treated women as property, not as equals. And unfortunately, some cultures or individuals still do, still treat women as property. Um, anyway, I remember a fellow that I knew years ago. He's not the only one that said that, but when he refers to his wife, he calls her the wife. Now, it's kind of like she's not quite human. The wife? Why not my wife or my sweetheart, but the wife? And some women will say the husband. It's not exactly the wonderful language. Anyway, so let's move on. First of all, let's start now with the Code of Hammurabi. That was the first written code. The alphabets had just been invented a few hundred years before that, and so instead of drawing pictures, mankind was now able to write stuff out in letters. Anyway, the Code of Hammurabi, he was a king of Babylon, and he wrote this code about 1760 BC. So that would be what, almost, well, 3,000 some odd years ago. This was 300 years after Abraham, 500 years before Moses. Now, you remember Moses was educated at Pharaoh's court, so he probably would have been familiar with the Code of Hammurabi. I'm quoting this from from Barr's book. Divorce in the Code of Hammurabi was allowed under certain conditions, often favoring the party that was deemed innocent, quote unquote innocent. Men could verbally terminate the covenant of marriage for various reasons. In other words, all he had to do was say, "Get out, we're done." And she had no anyway, she had no formal documentation. So if she's now put out or put away by her husband, she cannot prove to somebody else that she's no longer married. And that made it kind of difficult for her to remarry. The process was skewed towards men who could easily challenge divorce or refuse to provide the agreed dowry. And so sometimes a woman would bring wealth into the family or into the marriage, and he was supposed to, he would steal that from her and get rid of her. Part of the code said, and I'm quoting here, in the event a man's legal wife shall depart from him after having been guilty of extravagance, and so you can really interpret that a wide way, and before her departure she is brought to court by her husband, and husband solicits a divorce, which is granted, she shall be permitted to depart, and the husband shall not be compelled to compensate her. Now, this is different than the law of Moses, which we'll get to. She's just out of luck. He's got everything. In the event the husband does not desire to be divorced and desires to take another wife, the one deemed guilty of extravagance shall be compelled to remain in the house of her husband as a servant. She has no freedom. She has no rights. She's property. So she goes from being a wife to being essentially a slave in the house. That was the law in that particular region of the world, and I'm sure that the Egyptians would have known about it. The Israeli people, the Jewish people would have known about it, and that just was the way things were going. Now, who has power over property? Well, much of the struggle between men and women, especially when they separate, involves who has control over the assets and children. As we see in the Code of Hammurabi, this is how the ancient Babylonians could use the power of their government to settle these disputes. Likewise, the Law of Moses, which we'll get to, came 500 years later, also had laws and statutes designed to settle these disputes. But I think we all know it's one thing to have a law, it's quite another to have people actually obey it, and also for the authorities to actually enforce it. There are a lot of laws in the books that are not enforced, and a lot of laws that we're not following. Now, here we find the law of Moses in Deuteronomy 24, and you can see where it improves over Hammurabi. When a man takes a wife and marries her, then it shall be, if she finds no favor in his eyes, because he has found some unseemly thing in her, a lot of room for interpretation, folks, that he shall write her a bill of divorcement. Now, it's not just verbal, he has to actually write it out. And this is really important for us to understand for the rest of this message. He has to write it out. Secondly, he has to give it in her hand. He has to hand it to her. He has to do that, not through some third party or got lost in the mail, but has to send it out. And then he sends her out of the house. You can't live here anymore. You are free to go. You are free to go. And when she is departed out of his house, she may go and be another man's wife. She is free to remarry, which is a great leap of improvement over the Code of Hammurabi. And if the latter husband hate her and write her a bill of divorcement and give it to her hand and send her out of his house, or if the latter husband die, who took her to be his wife, her former husband, now he can't go get her again to try to, do the same thing all over again. This is not talking about a mutually thing where both of them, resolve their issues and come back together again. It's not talking about that. The focus here is on her former husband who would take her again and, of course, treat her very cruelly. So, 3 requirements or 3 steps. Very important to remember this. Write a bill of divorcement. It's not verbal. It's now written, so she and others have proof that she is free. This also includes returning any assets to her that she may have brought with her to the marriage. And that's also an important thing to know because we'll see about that later. He has to personally give it to her. He has to then send her out of the house. You can't live here as a servant or a slave. You are truly free and with the assets that had belonged to her and free to remarry if she wants to. Now, a man was expected to provide, and there's a lot more in Exodus. I'll just use this one in Exodus and Leviticus. If he marries another woman, he must not deprive the first one of her food, clothing, and marital rights. Those were things that were expected of a man, because usually he was the one that owned the property. He was the one that had the wealth, that brought the wealth. This was like having a second wife. He's not supposed to deprive her of that. If he doesn't provide her with these 3 things, she's to go free without any payment of money. Now, there are 3 basic necessities of life mentioned here: food, clothing, and marital rights. Now, marital rights was just not sex, but it was love and affection included. It's more than just marital, just more than sex. It basically was a loveless marriage where nothing was being provided. Putting away versus divorce. Now, hope we can understand this distinction. Putting away is simply removing her from the house, like the people did in Babylon. You're out of here, just get out. Technically, she's still married to him because remember, she was property, and there was no release of title, so to speak. She's still married to him, and in this and many other cultures, considered as his property. You could see this doesn't allow her to have much of a life in that ancient Jewish culture. She really only had 3 choices if that happened to her. She could be out there living alone without any assets and generally turn to prostitution in order to at least make enough money to be able to survive. That was her choice, 1. The other choice, find a man to live with, only to be considered by society as an adulteress. She could leave her family, country, and religion, where she can marry a foreigner. Those basically were her choices. None of them were good. Now, in our society today, with women being able to have the freedoms that they have and the finances they're supposed to make, the tables can be turned. So don't think I'm just talking about men here. I'm talking about any oppression that can go on in a marriage, because women are capable as well of evil, just like we men are. Now, divorce restores her freedom and his, including returning her dowry. This gives her a fresh new start. Her dowry or assets are returned and no longer in subjection to a loveless, unequal relationship. So, you know, how can I say it? God is no fool. God is well aware that we make mistakes. And in his mercy, he gives us ways to at least have a life after making mistakes. He does that. It built it into your body. I mean, let's say you cut your hand. He's made your body so it'll repair yourself, right? Uh, he knows stuff like that's going to happen. So he's made a way. Doesn't mean we follow it. So why would a man simply put away his wife? Well, because as head of the family, he could legally retain her assets, such as land, money, and other possessions. If he divorced her, he had to give that back. So you could see that by putting her away and not giving her that paper of writ of divorcement, he keeps the money, he keeps the stuff. And that's very selfish, that's very cruel, it's very heartless, and very greedy. By putting her out of the house, he deprives her of food, clothing, and shelter, so he doesn't have the expenses anymore, which she should have access to as they are still legally married, according to Jewish law, according to the Old Testament. He is supposed to provide that, even though she's not living there anymore. Perhaps he puts her away out of spite. Some people do that. I want to make you suffer like you made me suffer. I want to emphasize, putting away is not the same as divorce. Putting away is the last step in a divorce. Remember, you got to write the bill of divorce, you got to put it in her hand, and only then can you put away. If the writ of divorce is not written and she's got nothing to show, then she's still in bondage. Unfortunately, some Bible translations use the word divorce where it actually means putting away. Now we're going to get into that. Divorce or put away, which is the accurate translation? Frankly, the NIV is not very good on this subject. The Old King James is pretty good, but the ASV, the American Standard Version, that one is probably the most accurate one. But in Malachi 2 and verse 15, I know you've heard this. I know you've heard this verse and probably have that kind of a shadow in the back of your mind, especially if you've been divorced. So guard yourself in your spirit and do not break faith with your wife as your youth. I hate divorce. That's the way this is translated. And so if you have studied just this translation and you've been divorced, I know when I first read this many, many years ago, I really misread it. I thought, oh, God hates divorced people. That's how I read it. Can you believe it? Doesn't say that, but that's how in my mind I twisted it. And then I was like, oh, I hate divorce. Anyway, and I hate a man covering himself with violence as well as his garment, because well, we'll get to that. Well, let's cover it now, because in this particular issue of divorce, oftentimes there was a lot of violence, physical violence going on, as we certainly read in the paper and see on the news today. And maybe many of you have experienced that in your family of origin or your own family or in your neighbor's family, your friend's family. I don't think this is something that is how could I say it, unfamiliar to any of us. Now, this is the American Standard Version, and look how it says it. Therefore, take heed to your spirit, and let none deal treacherously against the wife of his youth. It's treachery to kick her out of the house with nothing. Then verse 16 says, for I hate putting away. Big difference. I hate putting away. I hate that you just kick her out with nothing and kick her out in such a way that she doesn't have a legal document to where she can actually pursue a normal life. I hate that. How would you feel? I have daughters. How would I feel if their husband did that to them? I would be furious with those guys to treat my daughters like that. I would be furious. And it's just not the right thing. And God hates that, says Jehovah, the God of Israel, and him that covers his garment with violence, says the Jehovah of hosts. Therefore take heed to your spirit that you deal not treacherously. So I believe this verse, for I hate putting away, is the proper translation. Remember, the Lord provided for divorce in the law of Moses. Now, let's move up one more. In Matthew 5 and verse 17, I'm sure you read this, but this was right after the temptation. Jesus is speaking to the people. And he says, do not think that I've come to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For assuredly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, not one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law till all be fulfilled. Frankly, the Jews were not obeying the law of Moses. They and their leaders had made many, many exceptions to retain their power over the people, especially power over women. It was a very patriarchal society, and in many cases still is. Jesus was calling out their hypocrisy and reminding them of what the law really said. The law really said, look, guys, you got to write out this bill of divorce. You got to give them back the stuff they brought into the marriage. You have to put this paper in their hand, and you got to give them the freedom. That's what it says. You can't be dealing treacherously and finding all these little loopholes. You can't do that. That's not honorable. It's also interesting that the law of Moses never required the priest to be part of the dissolution of marriage. I uh, Eaton Barr mentions that. I'd never thought of that before. I find that curious. Don't know what the implications are for pastors and clergy today, but it's interesting that Moses didn't require that. Now, again, another verse, Matthew 5, and let's read this one in both translations. In the NIV, it has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for marital unfaithfulness, causes her to become an adulteress, and anyone who marries the divorced woman commits adultery. Now, if you take the NIV version, what it sounds like Jesus is contradicting, not fulfilling, but contradicting the law of Moses. Yeah, you could divorce, you got to give her the certificate, but, I'm changing things. That's not really the correct translation. In the ASV, it was said also, whoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. That's what it says. There's two things. If you're going to put her away, you got to give her a writing of divorcement. But I say to you that everyone that puts away his wife, see, no divorce involved, just put her away, except for the cause of fornication. And by the way, that fornication meant she wasn't his legal wife to begin with. Maybe she was already married to somebody else, or maybe it was a case of incest. Uh, some other, and in the case of a priest, he had married a Gentile woman of a different religion. Those marriages weren't legal for the priests. Anyway, but I say to you that everyone that puts away his wife, and again, no divorce here, he doesn't do that. He just puts her away, just kicks her out of the house, so she's still his property, except for the cause of fornication, makes her an adulteress. He's saying to the men, you put your wife away, and you're making her an adulteress if she tries to live or marry somebody else. You're doing that to her. That's part of the violence. And whoever shall marry her when she's put away commits adultery. This is what your actions of not divorcing, but your actions of putting her away, if you're legally married to her and you just put her away without giving her the paper, you are creating a problem for her. So, summary. If legally married, a written certificate of divorce is necessary to become free again. If a man merely puts her away, she's still legally married to him and her freedom has not been restored. He's forcing her and a future partner into adultery if she lives with or attempts to marry another man. If a legally divorced woman marries another unmarried man, neither of them are committing adultery. I could also say if a legally divorced man marries another unmarried woman, neither of them are committing adultery. Okay? That's the safety valve. Now let's desire what Jesus desires. This is where the song, that last song, I think is really, I think helps to cement the message of that song. In Matthew 9, and I'll use the NIV this time, while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and, quote, sinners came and ate with him as disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" We're supposed to avoid those kind of people, right? On hearing this, Jesus said, "It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I've come to call the righteous, not come to call the righteous, but sinners." And I think that was kind of a tongue in cheek. You guys think you're righteous. Well, you're really not. I've come to call the people I've come to reach the people you think are bad people. You're worse than they are. I think that's kind of, sort of hidden in that statement. But this phrase, "but go and learn what this means." Jesus expects this to be a real difficult thing for us to comprehend, putting mercy ahead of sacrifice, and it usually is. I remember reading this maybe 50 years ago. It's been a long time. And when I read that, I thought, wow, he's saying this. Go and learn what this means. It sounds like people are going to have a real struggle with this. And I've come to see, yes, it's a real struggle. I seem to put sacrifice ahead. "Yeah, you got to sacrifice for this. You can't get it easy," that kind of stuff. And putting those burdens on myself and putting those burdens on others, it's a very difficult thing to comprehend. It's a very difficult thing for us to be merciful to other people. Now, he says it again here in Matthew 12. That's twice in Matthew 12. He brings this. David goes into the temple, and he and his companions eat some bread that had been consecrated, and which is technically not lawful, but only for the priests. Verse 5, "Or haven't you read in the law that on the Sabbath the priest in the temple desecrate the day?" They work. That's their job. They work on, they work on the Sabbath day. Everybody else gets the day off, but the priest's got to work. And today, your pastor works on Sunday. You get the day off, but he has to work on Sunday. Anyway, and he says, "They're innocent, yet I tell you that one greater than a temple is here. If you had known what these words mean, 'I desire mercy, not sacrifice,' you would not condemn the innocent, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." And I titled this slide, it's very important for us to get the point. Institutions are meant to serve us. We were never meant to serve the institution. Institutions are meant to serve us. We were never meant to serve the institution. When the institution is not serving us, but rather harming us, when the institution is not healing us, but hurting us, it's time to change the institution. It's time to fix that. It's supposed to help and serve us. Likewise, marriage was meant to serve us. Together, a husband and a wife are much greater than the sum of two. It's meant to serve us. We were not meant to serve marriage. And especially if a marriage is a rotten one. You're serving in a rotten institution if it's a marriage that can't be healed. And I want to also mention, I am not promoting an easy divorce. I would like to, if a couple is having troubles, get some counseling. Try to restore the marriage. Try to heal the marriage. But let's face it, there are times that can't be done. And when it can't be done, then it's time to separate. You may be able to change the way you feel, but your partner is still free to think how your partner wants to think. You can't control that. And that's why some marriages are better dissolved. Marriage was meant to serve us. We were not meant to serve marriage. Anyway, let's learn to think like Jesus. "The Spirit of the Lord is on me," he said. This was his first sermon after the temptation. "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners, recovery of sight for the blind, And here, to release the oppressed. Think about people that are oppressing each other in a marriage. And under the law of Moses, they were supposed to write out a bill of divorcement, and they weren't. In the Code of Hammurabi, they wouldn't release. You see all these traditions out there that don't release people that are oppressed in a marriage. This is part of it, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And as we say in this ministry, God is not mad at you. It is not good news to force someone to remain oppressed in a loveless marriage. Remember, we were made in his image, unity in the Trinity, not a hierarchy. A loveless, dysfunctional marriage is oppressive. Putting away without divorcing is an act of selfish cruelty. However, God permitting divorce is an act of his mercy. For us to look down on and treat people harshly who have been divorced and or remarried is also oppressive. Remember the woman at the well. How many husbands did she have? Jesus didn't criticize her for that. He didn't look down on her. In fact, she was the first evangelist to that village. After a conversation with him, she was so excited she went to her village and said, I found the Christ. And people listened to her and they came to Jesus. Selfish cruelty does not go away easily. The last part of Luke chapter 4, uh, if you remember the story, Jesus had a little bantering back and forth with the audience, and then all of a sudden things got violent. All the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard this. They had just said, look at the gracious words that come out of his lips. They got up and drove him out of town, took him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built in order to throw him off the cliff. I don't have time to bring this up on screen, but I believe he was quoting out of Isaiah 61. And what made them so angry is where Jesus stopped reading out of Isaiah. The next verse said something about proclaiming the vengeance of the Lord. They didn't, and that didn't sound very merciful. And he didn't read that. He stopped there. And if people have an expectation of God wanting to, destroy their enemies, they're not going to be very happy when you tell them that God loves their enemies. And that's why they were trying to kill him. Finally, if we have friends or family that have been struggling with stigma of divorce or people that are enduring very oppressive marriages, this book sheds light on how to help us understand how great the mercy and love of God is. Like I said, I couldn't even begin to cover all of it in there. So many more examples and scriptures that he quotes. God does not hate divorce. He most certainly does not hate divorced people. Neither should we. He does hate putting away, though. He knows that there need to be ways in a fallen world to make a way for us to recover from mistakes. What God does hate is putting away a marriage partner in a way that leaves them destitute without hope of ever starting over to have a happy marriage with someone else. If this is of interest to you, please get a copy of the book. It contains many examples that I haven't had time to give you. If you have any questions, we could talk a little bit about after this service, but frankly, it would be much better for me if you read the book first so that you and I would have a better mutual understanding of the author's approach. Please remember, God is not mad at you.